Does sport bring happiness? And is happiness good for an economy? London's facing an increasingly huge bill as it prepares to host the Olympics in 2012, and it'll be Rio's turn to pay, we now know, the Olympics after that. There'll be no shortage of happy faces in South Africa when it hosts the Football World Cup in 2010. But does it really bring about a boost to the economy? Professor Stefan Szymanski here at CAS has made a career out of trying to find out. I asked him to look at the issue wearing the hat of an economist rather than that of a sports fan.
Well, the object of economic activity ultimately must be happiness in some way or another. We undertake economic activity because we hope to gain material goods and services, we hope to gain personal success and triumph, and presumably we want all of that because it will make us happy. So anything that ultimately will bring us happiness can be considered as a kind of an economic benefit.
So you're just cutting out the material goods and services bit and going straight to the happiness?
Absolutely. Utility is the be-all and end-all here.
So is hosting a sporting event really worth the money?
Well, one question is whether it makes us happy or not. And we can certainly say that it's likely to make us happy during the event. So when something like the Olympic Games or the World Cup takes place, you are the centre of the world's attention. And I think that's the basic reason why people like it. They like everybody likes the world coming to them. You being the focus, everybody paying attention to you, and you being able to bask in reflected glory of what goes on. Particularly if your athletes are successful when you host an event, as is often the case, whether it's the World Cup or whether it's the Olympics, host nations tend to do relatively well. So that's another boost to happiness. So there's a lot of satisfaction to be derived from the event itself. The problem really comes with the fact that the cost of staging these events is very, very high indeed. Yeah, well, the problem is this, that it needn't be so, really. That's the first thing to say. These events need not be the huge mega circuses they've turned into. And in fact, it's not so long ago that these events were really quite modest and small-scale events. It's only really the last 30, 40 years that they've turned into these huge, gigantic excuses for extravagant spending.
But is that really true? You can't turn the clock back. Beijing put on a massive show last year. London can't put on an inferior show, can it? That's just the way things are now.
Well, it depends how we're going to judge success in the end. And we could decide to use a different yardstick for success than the ones we have in the past. And so let me give you an example. We used to judge the success of childcare policy, nutrition policy, by the weight of children. The heavier they were, the more successful we thought we were being, because children historically had been undernourished, and therefore if we could fatten them up a bit, that would actually be good for society. Now we've changed our mind about that. Now we've realised that's actually not such a good idea because they're becoming overweight and we have an obesity crisis, and therefore we're changing the way we measure it. And now we're measuring it by if we could actually reduce the average weight of children, we're saying that's successful. Well, it's a little bit like that with the Olympics. You could say if we change the measure by which we judged Olympic success, rather than whether it was medals or whether we built large stadiums, but perhaps it was some measure of whether a nation had demonstrated a commitment to sport and had actually managed to increase participation, had spread sport in some measurable way amongst a wider population, and we competed as nations on that basis, then perhaps we could scale down some of the extravagance and actually focus on what really matters.
So in a practical sense, how would you do this in a way that's consistent with economic theory?
I think it's very simple in terms of what really is going on here is the IOC is the ringmaster. They are conducting a competition amongst the world nations for the biggest prize. And the way they measure success, the way they award the prize is currently on who's prepared to spend the most money on a lavish games. And the IOC could turn that around instantly. They could just rewrite their charter and say, we will award the games to the nation that has demonstrated the largest increase in sports participation nationally over the last, say, 5-10 years. That would instantly change the competition. You would de-escalate all the spending which has become like an arms race, and actually you could have a more modest games and actually have a more successful and more socially beneficial game.
In economic terms, though, what would that do to the happiness factor?
Well, I think that would you'd have the same happiness factor of being the centre of attention. That would all be the same. You'd have the same happiness factor of Olympic success for the host nation, although presumably if your nation has been most successful in increasing participation over the last few years, that'll actually probably win you a few more medals, and therefore you'll get more satisfaction from that. But then the other point is that there's also clear evidence that people who participate regularly in sport are also happier, that there is a clear connection with that between the two, and therefore you could raise happiness in that third fashion.
So how do you measure happiness?
Well, there are different ways you can think about that. For example, when it comes to the effect of actually taking part in sport and its effect on happiness, what scientists have done is they've actually measured the release of endorphins when people take exercise. And endorphins are natural opiates in the brain, and they are released when you take exercise. So that's one direct measure of happiness.
Hard to do for a whole population, though, when you're measuring Olympic happiness.
Well, Olympic happiness, that's somewhat different. And the way we've measured that historically is just by looking at annual surveys. So there are very large-scale annual surveys about subjective views of well-being, which have been used for a variety of purposes. So we know over many years, for many countries, for thousands of people, how subjectively happy they feel, say on a scale of 1 to 5, and in relation to, and we know that in relation to their income, their employment status, their age, their marital status, and so forth. So we can relate happiness to those kind of variables, and we can also relate it to, well, are you hosting a major sporting event this year?
Briefly, does this sort of approach have wider implications, wider lessons for society in general?
Well, I think part of the big lesson here is to focus more on happiness and less on the money, I think. So I think there is a very important message there. The pursuit of increasing wealth over the last 40, 50 years has not made us collectively that much happier, it has to be said. Although it is also worth pointing out that being relatively wealthier than other people does seem to make us happier. So there are ways in which we can be happier through the pursuit of wealth, and there are ways in which wealth, income, economic activity makes us better off. But we need to think more carefully about it, and really, from a social point of view, we maybe need sometimes to restructure our priorities.
Stefan, I hope you'll come back and talk to us about football financing in the weeks and months to come.
I'll look forward to that.
Thank you.